Hello YouTube, this is Matt Poland, and today I'm going to bring you some of my thoughts on the A3 attack in the Grand Prix Sicilian. So, start out with the Grand Prix Sicilian. It's defined by knight c3 followed by advancing the pawn to f4. Now here, White has not played pawn to d4, cracking open lines in the center. Rather, he wants to play for the space advantage with the pawns on the king side. Black, on the other hand, his first four moves have all been based upon domination of the d4 square. So those are some themes in the Grand Prix attack in general. So here, there are basically two main moves from this position. There's bishop c4 and bishop b5, both developing moves. Bishop b5, the idea is to trade off the bishop for the powerful Sicilian knight, and or play d3, generating a pawn chain with the bad bishop outside. Black usually plays knight d4 against this. There is also bishop to c4 with the idea of pressuring the weak diagonal towards the f7 point. And here, against this, Black will play e6 and will follow up with knight e7 and d5 to counter the influence of the bishop on c4. It's kind of double-edged because this combination of g6 and e6 gives Black some chronically weak dark squares on the king side. But to compensate for this, Black is going to get some good action in the center once he gets his pawns rolling. So there's another move here, which is what this video is about, and that is 5a3, a more subtle type of opening move. This is what Michael Goller of the Kenilworth Chess Club in New Jersey calls the left hook Grand Prix attack. Michael has a few articles on this move on the club website, the Kenilworthian, which I think is an excellent website. I've linked to his main article on this move, which I'm not going to quote all of his analysis verbatim because there's quite a lot of it and a lot of sample games. So I would encourage you to read it. And I'm just going to give some of my thoughts on the line as a whole. Apparently the late Billy Coleus and International Master Lawrence Day of Canada have played this. I know a couple of strong players myself who use this line, and they both told me that they learned it from the same place, from Geller's article. So here is a waiting move. We want to see what Black will commit to before deciding what action to take. Usually Black plays one of these two moves, d6 or e6. The center pawn nudges. And the a3 is not just a wasted move. It has a couple of potential benefits. For instance, a3 allows the bishop to come to c4 and a2, which is generally a safer square than b3. And also, in the event that Black plays e6 and creates weaknesses on dark squares, the a3 move allows White to play some interesting shots to try and exploit that dark square weakness early in the game. So let's just there are other moves here aside from e6 and d6, which I've been wondering about myself. I guess I'll cover those first. A move I've seen played against me, and I've tried this move myself, is knight f6. Kind of provocative. After knight f6, e5, because otherwise Black is just going to play d5. I had an opponent play knight g8 against me, but I don't think that's very good because I think I tried this against John Burgess, and he played knight e4. Which is quite annoying because it attacks a pawn and also gets the knight behind the pawn in order to spearhead dark square attack. So, but as opposed to knight g8, I think knight g4 is rather better. The idea of knight g4 is that Black would like to play pawn to d5, closing up the position, and then remaneuver this knight to f5. White can play bishop c4 to stop the pawn from going to d5, is the most logical try. Then, after castles, an idea that I found here is that Black can play king to h8. And king h8, the point is simply to unpin the f-pawn. so that black in the future he can play f6 to try and force head on the point on e5, or he can play f5 locking up the center, depending on how white plays in the moves to come. So this is an interesting idea, the bringing the knight to f6 out and then g4 combined with king h8. Another idea that I have had against this is to play knight h6. I've used this with mixed success. Knight h6 leaves open the diagonal for the fianchetto bishop, and also the object is to play d6 and f5, blockading the white f-pawn with my own f-pawn. So yeah, I mean, it's developing a knight to the rim, and you have to be very careful that this knight doesn't get shut out with an f5 pawn sacrifice. But yeah, I think knight h6 is rather interesting as well. So I'm going to talk about the main two moves now, the center pawn nudges. d6 basically just creates a version of the bishop c4 line, where this pawn had to stop, take a pit stop on d6 before advancing to d5. So in theory that gives white a tempo up of the usual bishop c4 stuff, but I'm actually, Geller gives this line, which I'm going to show, that I find to be quite uninspiring for white. Instead of playing the direct d5 challenge, which would leave white up a tempo on usual lines, knight to d4, attacking the sensitive c2 pawn. I guess white doesn't have to take this. Maybe queen f2 can be tried. But if knight takes, then pawn takes, knight e2, then d5 for delayed challenge. And this is quite effective, actually, because now if bishop b3, the bishop loses a defender because of the a-pawn push. So takes, pawn to d3. This creates some havoc in the white camp and clears up an important square that the black pieces can use. And moreover, this pawn can't be taken, because if c takes d3, there's the tricky check queen b6, picking up the loose bishop on b3. So this suggests that instead of bringing the bishop back to b3, the bishop should go to a2. Well, here there's queen c7, which develops the half-open c file and makes it awkward for white to guard his c2 pawn. So I'm not quite convinced that white is just getting a clear advantage after d6, bishop c4. e6 is the main interesting move, because black often plays e6 and d5 in the Grand Prix attack. Here, white has some interesting options here due to the weakening of the dark squares. b4 is the delayed Wing Gambit, which Geller advocates. I've played this on the internet, and my opponents oftentimes will take this pawn. And after pawn takes pawn, I've never lost from this position, because it's just a positionally bad move. All of these four moves I told you earlier, they focus on dominating the d4 square. But with this one pawn capture, moving the c5 pawn off, now white can occupy that square. So sort of one move defeats the purpose of four moves, in a way. And also after the recapture a takes b4, anytime you can capture in chess with a rook pawn is a developing move in itself, because the rook behind it now brings pressure to the black queen side. And so it's just a bad chess decision to take with this pawn away from c5. And my opponents in this position, if they take the pawn once, they always take it twice. And then the trap here is bishop a3. This knight now creates a huge liability because of the weaknesses behind it. Like if black tries to protect this knight, then white has queen b1 in some lines, and the a-pawn can never advance because of the weak rook on a8. So knight c6, and now the trick knight to b5. The rook is taboo because of knight d6 check, followed by knight b7 discovered check, winning the queen. You should work that out for yourself if you are not clear on that. The best move is bishop f8, but this, after bishop d6 threatening knight c7 check, knight takes check, king f8, d4. White already has a frightening amount of compensation for a pawn, even though your computer will tell you that white is only slightly winning here. So yeah, that is the main line. instead of c takes b4, b6, which Geller mentions, is the best, I feel. Maintaining the tension and refusing to give up the d4 square. e5, is a common idea, but black can play d5. I really like this line because after h4, which Geller says he has had blitz success with, after knight g7 and h5, possibly advancing, possibly cracking open the h-file. But knight h7, I don't understand why black doesn't play h5. It looks like this just shuts down stone dead the kingside attack of white. Plus this knight can move to f5 and gain another player on the d4 square. I mean, I just don't buy into white's position here. If he has to do something like d4 or rook b1, I think this h5 line puts the Wing Gambit out of play, as a winning try for white. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts on the Grand Prix attack with a3. Hope you enjoyed.